Can you imagine discovering at the end of an entire season that the car you competed in was defective from the start? That it wasn't your talent or strategy or luck, but a hidden flaw that sabotaged everything? Well, that was exactly what happened with Lewis Hamilton in Abu Dhabi. And the most shocking thing was not only the technical failure, but the reaction of those who were at his side, Frédéric Vasseur and Charles Leclerc. Get ready, because what you are going to discover will change the way you see this 2025 Formula One season. The 2025 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, far from closing the season on a decent note for Ferrari, became a technical crime scene that shook the foundations of Maranello. Lewis Hamilton's weekend was not only worrying because of the results, it was a disaster from start to finish. A fourth consecutive elimination in Q1 and a brutal accident at Turn 9 during FP3 seemed, on the surface, just another episode in a failed adaptation of the seven-time champion to the Ferrari universe. But what came next revealed an infinitely more uncomfortable truth. Hamilton had raced the entire season with a defective car, and no one had seen it. Or worse yet, someone had seen it and decided to ignore it. Post-accident telemetric analysis revealed a devastating anomaly. A critical loss of structural rigidity in the front axle, specifically at the intersection between the monocoque and the suspension. But what was truly chilling was not the failure itself, but his behavior. This defect did not manifest itself under normal conditions or in static simulations. It only appeared under prolonged lateral G-loads, such as those generated in fast curves with constant radius and maintained support. In those milliseconds of maximum demand, the chassis of the SF25 began to flex unnaturally, losing structural consistency, generating a wave of turbulence in the lower flow of the car and literally taking the front axle off the asphalt. The car was no longer an F1 car. It became a death trap. Hamilton, moments after the impact, uttered a phrase that went almost unnoticed by the international broadcast, but that today is cited as irrefutable proof of his technical instinct. Something bent in the front and broke the back. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It was an accurate technical description. What bent was not a bar or a loose piece. It was the monohull, the soul of the car. Rigidity, that element that defines whether a car conveys confidence or fear, had been compromised at the deepest level. This flex didn't just affect handling, produced a domino effect. Sudden loss of front downforce, interruption of laminar flow under the ground, imbalance in the rear axle, and an unpredictable reaction in longitudinal stability. In simple words, the car became unmanageable just when it most needed to be precise. The accident occurred in one of the most critical sections of the calendar. Turn 9 of Yas Marina, a high-speed sequence that subjects the chassis to intense stresses for more than 2 continuous seconds. There, SF25 collapsed. And with it, the narrative that many had built during the season. That Hamilton was no longer at his best level, that he simply had not adapted, that it was the price of changing teams after more than a decade at Mercedes. What was behind it was not decadence. It was faulty engineering. This revelation not only affects Hamilton's sporting performance. It calls into question the integrity of Ferrari's quality control system, its simulation processes, its interpretation of data, and most worryingly, its willingness to listen when something doesn't add up. Because this ruling should not have reached Abu Dhabi. This moment, this technical and moral collapse, marks a before and after. Not only in the 2025 season, in the relationship between driver and team, in the credibility of the team, in the trust that Hamilton and Leclerc can place in a car that they now know can betray them without warning. And the worst, without anyone within the team admitting it in time. The revelation brought no relief. It brought pent-up anger and paralyzing fear. Because if Hamilton had suffered the most dramatic effects of this failure, what did that mean for Leclerc, who had been racing a possibly identical car for over 20 races? How many times had he miraculously saved the car in critical curves, without knowing that it was the car that was on the brink of collapse? How many times had he taken the blame for mistakes that he now understood were not his own? The feeling was not one of vindication, but of absolute vulnerability. Leclerc understood at that moment that he was not only fighting against McLaren, against Red Bull, against the strategies, against the pressure of being champion with Ferrari. He was also fighting his own car. Against a technical system that didn't trust him, that didn't investigate thoroughly when he asked for help, that prioritized pride over precision. His frustration was not limited to the structural error. It was with everything that error represented. The silence of the engineers, the institutional blindness, the culture of minimizing the pilot when the data does not match the sensation on the track. And this is where the real danger for Ferrari arises. Because there is nothing more devastating for a team than losing the faith of its number one driver. And Leclerc, after Abu Dhabi, crossed an invisible line. He no longer spoke like the young heir of Maranello, the protege of the project. He spoke like a man who has seen how his intuition was disregarded, how his warnings were ignored, and who now understands that talent is not enough to win at Ferrari. Something else is needed, a car that doesn't lie to you, a team that listens to you, a structure that protects you. That day in the Ferrari motorhome, Leclerc said nothing. But those who saw him leave the meeting described him as a man who no longer trusts blindly. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous sign for the future of the team. Because when a driver like Leclerc stops believing, it is not a question of whether he will continue competing. It's about how much you're willing to risk for a cause that no longer fully represents you. And that, in Formula One, can make the difference between redemption and total collapse. What happened in Abu Dhabi was not a simple technical setback. It was a turning point that forced Ferrari to face an uncomfortable truth. The most historic team in Formula One is still capable of self-destruction from within. The structural failure of the SF25 was not solely an engineering error. It was the manifestation of a system that still has profound deficiencies in information management, in the team culture, and, above all, in its ability to listen to those behind the wheel. The consequences of this discovery go far beyond short-term damage. What is at stake now is the future credibility of the Ferrari project. And that is terrain that is not easily rebuilt. Frédéric Vasseur understood this immediately. That's why his reaction was so drastic. He ordered audits, reshaped internal hierarchies, suspended key personnel, and announced a complete review of structural verification processes. But none of those actions, no matter how necessary, can repair the emotional and symbolic damage this season left. Because what broke at Yas Marina was not just the chassis of the SF25. Trust between the drivers and the team was broken. The narrative that Ferrari had tried to build since 2023 was broken. That of a modern, transparent, technical team in control of its own destiny. And in that context, Ferrari's future now appears to be a steep path full of uncertainty. The 2026 project, based on the new technical regulations, suddenly becomes a bid for redemption. But that bet starts from an unstable base. Lewis Hamilton, after an entire season racing with a faulty car, will have to decide if he still trusts Ferrari to deliver a winning machine. And Charles Leclerc, marked by years of accumulated frustrations, will have to renew his commitment to a team that did not know how to believe him when he needed it most. These are not technical challenges. They are psychological battles. And in modern Formula One, where the reaction time is short and the demands are infinite, those battles define championships. On a structural level, Ferrari will have to do much more than correct the design of its chassis. You will need to redesign your operating culture. Create channels where pilot warnings are treated with the same level of authority as data. Strengthen your simulations with tools that consider extreme scenarios, not just ideal conditions. And above all, break the historical habit of sweeping problems under the rug. Because Formula One no longer allows that luxury. Today, the winning teams are those that face the truth with brutality, that correct with speed, and that understand that the car is not only a carbon and electronic machine. It is also an extension of trust between driver and engineer. Your perspective is a fundamental part of this analysis. Because Formula One is not only experienced on Sundays. It is lived in every conversation, in every theory, in every doubt shared among those of us who follow it with passion. And if you want to continue exploring the uncomfortable truths, technical secrets, and human dramas that define this category, be sure to subscribe. Because this story is not over. It's just beginning. And what's coming promises to be even more intense. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.